thank you so much to Neil MacGregor for that wonderful lecture, the very first Octavia Hill lecture for the National Trust. And I'm so glad that you can stay and discuss that now on Times Radio with our very special panel of guests who are here at the Royal Society this evening. So we're going to welcome them individually, very warmly. Please, first of all, the columnist from the Times newspaper and author of Empire Land, How Modern Britain is Shaped by Its Imperial Past, Sathnam Sanghera. Next up is the historian, author and broadcaster and Professor Emerita at Roehampton University, Suzannah Lipscomb. And finally, please show some love for our final panellist, the presenter of the History Hit podcast, Dan Snow. Welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for giving up your evening to chew the fat with us, really. I'm going to start, if I may, with a few questions to Neil before bringing all of you in. Neil, I suppose one thing that's very clear is that you believe that these great houses the National Trust own must still have a role in our society today. They may have to redefine that slightly. They may have to change the parameters a bit, but they need to be members of the community. And I wonder how far, because you talked about how things had changed and how some things had been reimagined and how the local communities had been brought in. But how far do you actually see the different places that you mentioned are succeeding in doing that today?
Well, in Penryn, I think very definitely. And it's perhaps a little unfair that Penryn is the only one where that is actually already happening and working. I mean, Kedleston is in the process of rethinking the presentation of the lower floor, in the process of, you've had what they call a year of listening, engaging with local, particularly local communities of South Asian heritage, in Derby, very nearby, and in Leicester nearby, and trying to establish what are the questions of interest to them and how the connection might engage with those questions. In Clarendon, the work is still in progress about how the damage to the house can be left visible while the house itself is kept safe and safe to be visited. So it's too early to say whether they're going to succeed. What I think is striking in all cases is the combination of the different kinds of audience, of different kinds of visitor who should be able to see their place in the story in a way that was almost impossible before. And particularly that idea of who makes this house. I mean, the huge number of people that actually have to contribute before a house, a country house of the sort we all know, can exist.
Sathnam, how has your kind of, I don't want to use the word journey, it's such an annoying word, but it's the best word here. Your kind of, how has your opinion changed from, as a 10-year-old, as a teenager, as the man that you are today? How has it changed when you look at National Trust properties like the ones we've been talking about today, and how connected you feel towards them?
Actually, we used to joke, we used to call the National Trust the National Front in the West Midlands because it was so white, but that was in the 80s, and now I go quite a lot. And I think sometimes brown people feel stared at because it's such a white crowd. But I take my mother a lot, but I think it also has to do with their attitudes as well. I think a lot of brown people, when they go out, they want to go shopping, they want to see their relatives. And also my mum has a very utilitarian view of the countryside, She doesn't understand why there's empty fields, when you could be farming that stuff. But I think it's changing quite a lot. And I think if you're a parent nowadays, the National Trust is compulsory because it's somewhere you could take your kids. And I think my generation and beyond really see the National Trust as theirs.
Dan, you very much grew up. You were born into the National Trust, basically, weren't you? That's what you were telling me earlier.
I was dragged there. I've been to every single National Trust property in a 250-mile radius of southwest London. And frankly, other equally brilliant, but we shall not talk about those other heritage organisations here tonight. But we were heritage organisation agnostic in our family. But no, National Trust. In fact, my dad, he invented TripAdvisor in a pre-digital age. He had this big folder. It was called the National Trust folder, which I'm just remembering now. And when we visited a property, we'd write in a review, and we sort of, so again, actually, now that I think about it, if he digitised that, he could have made something himself. But so the National Trust was all we did as a family. We did not go shopping, and collectively. And I found it, like all children, deeply confusing. That's why we walk around these old houses and battlefields and things. And then I got Stockholm Syndrome and started to enjoy it, and I inflict it upon my children, because that's how generational trauma works. And we spend a huge amount of time in National Trust properties, for which I'm enormously grateful. And I feel, also, as someone who does a bit of travelling, I am very aware what an extraordinary reservoir and asset the National Trust is to this country. We take it for granted. And that's why more people go to heritage sites every weekend in this country, go to football matches, because of the extraordinary depth and wealth and range of those sites that we have available to us.
Suzannah, what about you? How has your relationship changed, if at all, towards these kind of properties, 20 years ago to what you do today? I understand, you're kind of steeped in the academia of it all, but I wonder, kind of from a personal point of view, I'd be quite interested as well about how it's changed.
So I think that one of the key ways it's changed for me is that I love going to historic houses because I always have a sense of the tangibility of the past. So I always have this feeling in those spaces that you can just slip back through time and you're in the spaces where these things happened. And that's been the case for a long time. But I suppose one of the things that's changed for me is thinking about how we get at those stories of the past. I was lucky enough a few years ago to work with the National Trust, with Polly Schomburg and the team up at Hardwick Hall on an exhibition about Bess of Hardwick. It was called We Are Bess, and it used 20 photographs of modern women to explore themes of Bess of Hardwick's life. And what was really interesting about that was that we tried to do something that invited the participation of the community in some of the ways that Neil's been talking about. And to have a sense that in a historic house or site, what one has an opportunity to do isn't just to broadcast, it isn't just to disseminate, but it's actually to receive as well. And so we got loads of people posting their comments about how they were best. And it was so enriching, and I think everybody who went and then saw it then had their experience further deepened and enriched because of that feedback from other people. And so I suppose my sense about history has come to what the historian Raphael Samuel called that history is the work of 1,000 different hands, and that actually our job as historians isn't just to kind of preach and tell people how it is, but it's also to hear and listen.
Yes. Neil, what did you make of that?
Well, particularly the last point, that history being the work of 1,000 hands, because that's effectively what is happening in all these houses, that more and more people with their skills, their experience, are being asked to comment and to invite. Now, this is again a huge challenge for the Trust, because as I'm sure better than anybody, trying to mix oral history, personal recollection and reflection with academic rigour is extraordinarily difficult. But we also, I think, know that it gives you a far richer and a far truer account of, or attempt at accounting to what actually was going on. And that's why this widening of the stories, but also the enlarging of the number of people telling them is so crucial. That surely is what the great row is about statues, about history in the public, is what we're all about. I mean, who tells the story and whose story? And widening both of those is surely, I mean, it's a great democratization of the historic process. People claiming the right to be involved in the presentation of their history.
And widening it also in terms of, I presume, the definition of what history is and of what these properties are, because you very purposefully chose Tintagel and the Castlefield Viaduct. I mean, you can't get too more different than that. Is that everyone's definition of a historical property? And should it be?
Well, everyone will have their own. I'd have thought, I mean, yes, I think it is. I mean, they both force reflection on the past and what is no longer there. And that's why I think Tintagel and the Castlefield Viaduct in a way go together, because they're both about lost worlds. And we now have a view of what British railways once were, about as fantastical as Camelot, really, isn't it? So I think our theory and legend and our relationship with the railway probably got quite a lot in common.
I mean,
particularly today.
Well, yes, exactly. Some of you will have already been to either one or both of these. I wonder if you had a choice, Sathnam, which one would you go to?
Kettleston, I didn't know that it existed. I didn't know Curzon had recreated this imperial house near Derbyshire, or in Derbyshire.
In Derbyshire, yes.
Yeah.
No idea.
Suzannah, is there anything that you would visit for the first time? Is there anything that you want to reassess your own relationship with? Or have you seen them all?
Oh, well, no, I certainly haven't seen them all. I mean, every place that we've heard talked about tonight, we now all have to go and see again because we've got a completely different view of them. But the thing that I was struck by, as someone who works in the 16th century, looking at Revo, and thinking about that tension there between what people expect of a National Trust day out, I think was inherent in what Neil was saying, that on the one hand, you go and you want to see beauty. Here we go, the picturesque ruins. And on the other hand, are we also allowed to talk about history? And I guess, the story of the dissolution of the monasteries, as Neil pointed out, is a story of trauma and of destruction and the dissipation of ancient medieval libraries and plate melted down, and 20,000 monks and nuns, perhaps, turned out onto the streets, poverty for many local communities. But the difference there is that we don't have that many descendants, funnily enough, of monks and nuns who are complaining about it. And whereas, a lot of the stories that we were otherwise looking at today, there are still people affected by those histories. And so it's much easier to say, you're looking at a beautiful scene, but it's also got history in it. But I think Neil raised the question of what do you do when you're looking at something beautiful, but the pain that underpins it is still felt. So that's what I would want to go and look at places and think about.
And what about myths and legends, Suzannah? Obviously, we're talking about Tintagel. They play a large role in the public understanding of history. King Arthur, Alfred burning the cakes, Victoria not being amused. I wonder how much historians... how much a responsibility do they have to try to kill myths, and how much should they use them to enthuse people like me?
Well, myths are your way in, aren't they? I mean, you've got... That's why people go to Tintagel, and that's why they, want to hear about Alfred the Great. That's where we start. I am struck by the fact that in every instance here, they were talking about myth in some way, because whenever you're presenting history in the public, you're talking not about history, you're talking about the memory of history. And so how you remember history is about the construction of myth. And I also think that whenever we go to a National Trust house, quite a lot of the time, we are making believe that we are Lord or Lady for the day. And the sort of terminology that people use when they talk about how we beat the French at Agincourt, when none of us were there. I sort of think that we kind of make believe when we go to National Trust houses, and that some of this reconsideration of what the National Trust does is about recognising that maybe we're going to have to make believe that we were the people whose Labour funded it as well, because that's actually who we're descended from too.
Dan, what is the balance in your mind of us remembering the lords and the ladies that Suzannah was talking about, and remembering the huge number of people whose names we don't remember, the people who built them?
Well, that's the great, exciting and stimulating challenge of our time and of Neil's talk. The balance is what the National Trust is so lucky, because it gets to do both in different ways, and it's a rainbow. And I think if you can go to some houses where particularly the local volunteers, local people are very engaged with the more traditional historiographical interpretation, where perhaps the family are particularly martial and they've got lots of captured enemy banners and weapons. You think, well, let's if that's what people want, let's enjoy it and tell those stories. And then you can do something completely different at a different site. And I think that's what's so exciting. The balance, though, is something, and we change. We write and listen and imbibe the history that we want. So when I was young, I'm not doing my dad a great disservice there, making him sound like a Victorian. He read me Our Island Story. That was our thing, which was it is now like, I mean, even then in the 80s, it was kind of embarrassing, but it's now just sort of, it's almost a banned book. And it was just full of pictures of beautiful illustrations of the Black Prince being super chivalric. And Edward III having a much better claim to the French throne, which actually I think is probably true. And these heroic figures like Clive and Wolfe, bringing the unbridled joys of enlightened rule to lots of other parts of the world. So that was when that book was written. That was essential to teaching young boys to go out and be imperial officers of the crown themselves. We don't need that history anymore. We don't need Drake and Nelson. We need Octavia Hill. We need other stories. We need the stories of the men and women who worked in those slate quarries, who laboured on the plantations. Those are more important to us today, and that's okay. Just as history isn't something that just arrives in a blob, and history is, when they built Trafalgar Square, there was something there before Trafalgar Square. It was a very deliberate decision to stick Nelson in the middle of it on a ginormous column and create a kind of imperial beating heart. And in the same way, when they chucked the statue of Richard the Lionheart outside the faux medieval 19th century House of Parliament, that's that's a statement, it's a decision they made for them at that time. It doesn't mean that's what we need now.
We'll talk about a couple of examples. I want to get onto Penryn, actually, because I found that really very arresting. But the Revo Terrace, Neil, I mean, I think, was I right in saying that you think it's what's been done is interesting, but perhaps more needs to be done to help visitors understand the site?
No, I don't think that, because the whole point of a place, any National Trust property, is you take from it what you want. You pursue what interests you. I think, I mean, I've been to Revo Terrace many times without the slightest concern for those unfortunate monks and nuns. I'm just enjoying the sheer beauty of the place. That was what was intended. And that's clearly, that is one level. I happen to be interested in the fact that, just as Dan was saying, about Richard Coeur de Lion outside Parliament, that the very fact of the making of it is a telling of a history, and a particular history at a particular moment, right at the moment of Culloden as a Scot. It seems a rather important moment in our national history we don't talk enough about. But what that meant and what was being denied in the past and refused for the future, all of which is part of that aesthetic narrative. But no, I wouldn't disturb that terrace at all with a large notice board explaining what unhappinesses lie behind or below. But somewhere on the National Trust website, that should be there. And this is, I think, what is worth mentioning, when you, as well as visiting the buildings, visiting the websites is now extraordinary. And precisely those other histories that need to be available are increasingly available on the websites. Okay. And that, I think, for Revo Terrace, that's what I think it belongs. I wouldn't want anything there to upset anybody's day out.
Oh, okay. Sathnam, do you think that's enough on the website?
I think there's an idea now that history is a fixed thing, and it's become bizarrely popular. Certain organisations who haven't been mentioned tonight are fond of that idea. But even some of our politicians, I mean, Rishi Sunak, during the leadership campaign, was talking about how he wanted to send people who did Britain down, refer them to Prevent, the anti-terrorism agency. My appointment's on Wednesday, 6 p.m. But obviously, I mean, what you said in your lecture, we need a widening of history. And there's an idea that decolonisation is about deleting things. In my view, it's not. It's about widening the discussion. So you could talk about World War II, you could talk about the imperial contribution, you could talk about the Tudors and talk about the black figures who were in the court of Henry VII and Henry VIII. It's all about widening the discussion. And as an intellectual, as a member of the National Trust, you've got to be in favour of that.
Dan, the Penryn example, were you? I mean, you are a historical expert. Did you know all of that? Was any of that new to you?
Nearly all of it, yes. And then as a son of Snowdonia, christened in Cricketh there by my great nine in the Baptist chapel, I felt very ashamed through that whole thing. For a Scotsman to be telling me about that was deeply embarrassing. No, of course I didn't. I didn't know any of that. It's wonderful. And to follow up on Sathnam's point, it is a sign of a mature and confident society to be comfortable with nuance and contradictions. A beautiful house paid for by the blood money coming from the Caribbean and the slate quarries. These are difficult, but let me tell you, I've been to places elsewhere in the world where there is no discussion of that history, where history is imposed from on top. And the way we have it, what we're trying to do here is infinitely preferable. It is a sign of a richness, of a sophistication, that we're able to say, Nelson, heroic, deeply flawed. That's making me think, it's challenging. I don't know what to do about that. I don't know how to, rather than go to most countries around the world, they go, this is someone you need to revere, shut up and don't ask any questions. We should be deeply proud of people writing books and asking questions and talking down things. And we should come away from history without, I've spent 20 years thinking of something about history, and I definitely am less confident than I was at that age 18 when I knew everything. And now I don't know what to think, and I love it.
And Curzon's such a great example. I mean, he's such a grand man, and it's so impressive in so many ways, but also a racist, famously said there wasn't a single Indian in India capable of being in the government. But it extends to people like Churchill, He had terrible racist views, even by the standards of his time, but he saved liberal democracy. Gandhi said terrible racist things about black people in South Africa, but equally defeated the Raj and was a great man. And we've got to be capable of holding these multiple contradictions in our heads.
Go, Suzannah.
Actually, one thought I had about the thing you said, Neil, about keeping abreast of truth. And you said that the truth is moving and changing and expanding. And I think expanding is the right word. I'm not sure about moving or changing, because I think I'm a bit old-fashioned with regard to thinking about the past. I think it actually happened, and that there is something that actually happened, and that we're trying to get at that. I think that what we're just doing is looking at it from different angles. We're revealing it. We're shining light onto it. The truth, as it were, hasn't changed. These things did happen, but we're just making sure that we can see it from all angles. And that's what's going on when we're saying we need to think about that wonderful line, the unhonoured dead.
Right, shall we break off for some questions now? I wonder whether anyone would like to ask. There's a question over there at the back. Hopefully the microphone will come to you very, very shortly. If anyone else has any questions. So we've got one there and one there. If you could just say who you are, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, Sundar Katwala from the think tank British Future. It's a refreshingly optimistic lecture and conversation about how all this contextualization can be an expansion and not a taking away. And I just wonder how you can take the nuance of what you can do in a place into that much more polarised public conversation that's much more controversial, much more polarised. Do you want to diffuse that? How can you use that controversy or diffuse it?
Neil?
I'm not quite sure I understand what the challenge is. Are you trying to say how we can make this kind of thinking about an expanding history, finding more narratives, more available to a wider public.
Yes, what you're doing in the place is very nuanced, but what we're doing in the media and in politics is
I think he's
very
asking
unnuanced.
what would you say to Restore Trust, who say there is one view of history, this is our view, we should win, everyone else will shut up?
Well, I think the answer really is that we all know that you only get to a better understanding of truth by disagreement. I mean, that's the whole basis of our civilization, that to reach deeper, wider truths, we need to disagree and argue. And I think it's that the disagreement as an instrument to reach truth is really what we need to insist on. That only that way can we find new truths.
But how do you do that when organisations like that are so well funded, they have such powerful supporters, and there's now a popular idea.
They write great books.
Well, not everyone reads them.
Unfortunately, that get people to think and to challenge. I mean, that's and you go on Times Radio, didn't you?
Indeed. Are you able to straddle both worlds, though? I wonder, Neil. I mean, are you able to? You're able to present the situation as it is, with your great background in history, and also to encourage people to perhaps just think about the entire context. Do you find that you don't find that difficult in any way?
No, I don't, because as Dan said, I mean, the level of public engagement with history and with thinking about the past in Britain is at a level of no other country in Europe. It's largely because of free museums. It's got a great deal to do with the BBC, and it's got a great deal to do with the National Trust. But for over 100 years, in every case, these organisations have embraced millions of people in different ways of thinking about the past. No other country has anything like that. And the idea that in any way this is elite strikes me as laughable. When you look at the visitor figures, or indeed at the demographics of who goes to our museums, I mean, particularly the great municipal museums up and down the country. As a country, we've always understood that we need to think about who we were to understand what we are.
Now, there was another question on that side. Yes, if we could have your question, please. Just say who you are, that'd be lovely.
My name's Tony Schultz, and I'm a member of the National Trust since I was born. I'd like to congratulate the National Trust on publishing a book on tapestries, much neglected artefact, or the most neglected artefact. But I wanted to ask them to do something else, which is to publish a book about the economics of the country house. I see this as a can opener, a way of finding out what the relationship of the estate with the house is, and the relationship of the farming community was with the house, and also finding out why and how they lived, and how it worked, and how it changed through the great agricultural depression and the huge rise in taxation, and what that relationship was. There's nothing written in there. What you read about is the Countess's unfortunate affair with the son of the Prime Minister, and I find this somewhat dismal. And can I just finally say that slave labour is not over. I went to a country house about 10 years ago and discovered to my horror that people were volunteering to garden a National Trust garden and help, but they had to pay for the privilege. Thank you.
Goodness me. Suzannah?
I do think the key word there is volunteer. I think actually these points, the two questions we've had are connected, because the funding model that Neil was talking about earlier, and that you're asking should be better explained with each house, is the key to the whole thing, isn't it? Because we're talking about how the beautiful things that we enjoy were paid for. And I think that trying to deal with this question of how we have a more kind of nuanced discussion about this in the popular sphere is related to this, because it's saying that we can have a version of history that goes beyond saying this is good and this is bad. I mean, it's very 1066 and all that, isn't it? The way that we often in the public sphere this is talked about. And actually, if we can say this art is beautiful, and it's, this sculpture is gorgeous, but that it was paid for in a way that was grotesque, that allows that complexity. And I think the economics of it actually perhaps gives us a way into thinking about a more nuanced conversation.
Okay, we will get some more questions. We'll have another opportunity for more questions. So hold those thoughts. Let's continue on. I was fascinated by Kedleston as well. I know that you were. Sathnam. Do you think there's obviously a consultation going on with kind of the wider Asian communities in the wider area, and other people as well who perhaps wouldn't have visited that before. If you were in charge, how would you bring them in?
It's a good question, isn't it? I mean, if I could summarise your lecture in quite a naff way, is that, you're saying that basically we have a multicultural heritage because we had a multicultural empire. We have a multicultural society, largely because we had a multicultural empire too. I mean, these just seem to be really obvious things. And I think there's a consensus amongst imperial historians about these things, but there's a fight back. But I think that fight back is stopping people from visiting. I think it's stopping people from doing their work. It's stopping the National Trust from making it more open to everyone. And the word everyone came up a lot when you were talking about Octavia Hill. I think she, if she was around now, would be dismissed as woke, because she was really keen on things like the National Trust being open to everyone. She was campaigning on social housing. She was a woman. All these things would now be dismissed as woke. And I think it reflects the fact that our discourse isn't actually that great when it comes to these things. So I think the best thing we could do is to improve the discourse.
How does the discourse or the discussion put people off visiting?
I think it creates a kind of a divide. I think this history, imperial history, is history that unites everyone. It unites most ethnic groups in Britain, but there is a certain group of people who think that actually if you talk about slavery or racism or exploitation of India, it's divisive. You're creating, divides which aren't there. And I think that kind of toxicity puts people off.
Suzannah and Dan, I wonder how you would, if you were in charge, what would you do? Did you have any ideas when you were looking at, the lower hall, the main hall, etc., how this would best be done? I know that there are people who are addressing this, but were there any kind of general ideas that went through your head about how this could be done?
I liked the fact that you've got the lower floor to talk about India. Was quite interesting because you've got all this amazing Adams interior above, and then what's holding it up, right? That's the funding model. The ground floor, what's holding that up is all of the work behind that, the conquest of India and the exploitation of resources in that country. So I think that would be the way into looking at that. And then, of course, you can talk about the beauty of the artifacts from India and all the complex and nuanced and wonderful discussion that you gave us of Curzon. There is that opportunity, and I think that needs to be there. You're not asking for something that just beats the visitor around the head and said, it was bad, it was bad, it was bad. You want something that's much more complex than that and looks at what he did that was we think worthy of praise and what we think may need to be criticised. And I think it's okay to do both those things. Dan?
Well, I definitely find it a lot easier sounding all smart rather than actually taking decisions that would actually lead to outcomes in the real world. So that's it's very difficult. How on earth do you attract different communities to that house? I mean, I don't think I'm necessarily the right person to ask about that. Very good ideas already. I mean, I think possibly, I like kind of narrative history. It's what I do for a living. And so maybe it's a case of, although it's not on the National Trust to suddenly build a museum of Anglo-Indian history. You've got incredible objects there. I would maybe like to see more story around it, but that's because that's what I come from a place of telling stories.
Yeah. Indian weddings are the answer, aren't they?
Yeah, yes. Indian weddings and Facebook ads.
Basically.
Neil, I was very struck by something you said earlier, which I do appreciate your honesty, because you said that you don't want to spoil anyone's day out, which I thought was a really interesting thing to say. And I think there'll be people sitting here who will agree with you, and there'll be some people who might cringe a little bit at that, which is, again, that's fine, that's different views, etc. What does spoil people's day out and what doesn't, but still changes the narrative?
Well, I think the one thing that spoils my day out is when information is presented in large panels with wretched typography, poor spelling and wretched punctuation. And it gets in the way of looking at what I want to look at. And we all know this is the huge problem of presenting information about a historic interior. I mean, that upper floor at Kedleston, we could have spent the whole evening going around the different rooms upstairs. But they are complete ensembles. And the marvellous thing is they are intact and entire. So it's almost impossible to put information in that. But it's the attempts to do that really wreck my day out. I want to look and enjoy the looking and then go and inform myself. Now, I think it's that's at a personal level.
Yes, okay. Suzannah?
So I used to work at Hampton Court, and the thing we used to say about when people arrived is it's wheeze and teas. So that's what you want when you first turn up. You need to know where the loos are, you need to know where you're going to get a cup of tea. But now, of course, added to that, it's about, I'm going to have a bad day if my child doesn't have a good day. So it's about making sure that there's things on that will entertain children and give parents the answers to the questions that children are going to ask. So it's about helping adults to look intelligent in front of their children. That helps too. Dan?
Well, my kid asked me the other day why the Queen gets paid more money than nurses. So I could have used an interpretation panel for that. I think our tolerance for horror is pretty high, like amazingly high. As someone who's visited the worst places on earth, whether it's implantation of enslaved people in the American South or in the Caribbean or death camps in formerly German-occupied Poland, and actually you see everyone having a pretty nice time. So therefore, I don't think you're going to ruin people's days out by presenting them with troubling content. So I don't think you have to worry about that sort of triggering and things, because people go to places and they're able to actually. I'm amazed at people's ability to be confronted with unimaginable horror, like or the Verdun ossuary, where there's the disjointed bones of tens of thousands of people, and still have a nice day out with the family. And I don't know how I feel about that. I think it's right that you're able to do that. So yeah, the point being, don't go easy on people because you're worried about ruining their day out. I mean, I think that people can cope with a lot.
Yeah, it's called dark tourism, isn't it? I mean, people choose to go to these places quite often.
I think the National Trust are actually doing a pretty good job, because I've been going around foreign equivalents. I went to a slave plantation in Barbados. Slavery barely mentioned. I did this similar thing in a former slave plantation in the Deep South. Slavery barely mentioned. I actually asked the guide in Barbados why slavery hadn't been mentioned. And he was a black guy of about 21. And he said, we've been told not to talk about it because it upsets the tourists. Wow. And I think you wouldn't see that at the National Trust now. I think things have really changed, and we've got to congratulate the people behind it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting actually if we have another opportunity to hear from you about, if anyone has any particular questions or views on that idea of too much information in inverted commas. Can we talk about Hinemehi, I hope I'm saying it correctly, and giving back? I mean, this was fascinating, Neil. You explained what's happening there with the carvings going back. Can you just explain, will something come back in their place?
There are people here who will be able to correct me when I get this wrong. But as I understand it, there's a mutual giving that new carvings will come from New Zealand as a gift to the Trust, and the Trust will give the carvings currently at Clarendon to the Ngāti Hinemehi in New Zealand. So there will be, and that's part of the point, because there will be a new meeting house which will be able to be used by UK Maori. But just as Sathnam was saying, we have a population, there is of course now a British Maori population. I mean, this is part of their inheritance as well, and they're part of our community, our society. So the great thing about this new house is that it will be shaped to be used by them. It will still have the connections with New Zealand, and it will still keep the connection at Clarendon with Lord Onslow, and what was, as far as one can tell, a very successful governorship and responsibly executed. So it takes its place in many different traditions, and many people have a place in that story.
And do you think this is a kind of good blueprint, Neil, for not thinking of anything in particular, just wondering whether it might be? Do you think it might work in other instances?
Well, I think
returning or exchanging.
Every case, of course, different. What is very particular about this case is that for the people in New Zealand, the spiritual significance of those carvings and of Hinimihi is very much a living part of their self. And the role that Hinimihi played in protecting so many of the community during the eruption is still a living part of their imagining of the world. It's always very difficult to talk about other people's faith structures, but it clearly, that I think is true. Now, that's quite rare. It's really quite rare for objects that have that sacred dimension and protective dimension at a communal level to be peacefully somewhere else, to be engaged with over a long time across distance. So I think it's a very particular case. It's a wonderfully happy case, I think, but it is very rare.
Yeah. What does the rest of the panel think about, what we can learn from that particular example? Of course, every case is different, but...
It reminds me of David Cameron's famous statement that if we gave the Koh-i-Noor diamond back, the British Museum would be empty. And for a start, I don't think the Koh-i-Noor diamond's in the British Museum.
No, not at last count.
But also, I think the British Museum, I think, has only 1% of its collection on display. If it gave back even a small proportion of the contested items, it would have a lot of stuff. And also, we need to have these positive relationships with the parts of the world at the moment, especially at a time we're really struggling with our international relationships. It doesn't need to be a negative thing.
That's interesting. Dan?
I feel I haven't got a spicy hot take on this one. I think it's case by case. I think there's I think we have it's part of, again, I do think willingness to exchange, to return, to engage, to swap, to gift is actually what makes us confident and truly be a global, I can't believe I'm saying this, global Britain, but and it's so being open to that, being open to those advances and having good faith conversations is great.
Okay. Suzannah?
I think it comes down to that idea about the history of Britain has not just been enacted on this island. It is not just this island story, and that British history has happened all around the globe. And that actually we therefore have continuing responsibilities. I'm sure Dan's right. I'm sure it's a case-by-case basis. But it seems to me that there are some very constructive precedents here, and that it says that we recognise that our past was beyond the seas as well as just on this soil.
If the Dutch can give us back the stern of the Royal Charles, which sits in the Rijksmuseum, they can have anything they want in return.
Let's talk about Octavia Hill now. Now, Neil, you gave us quite a picture of Octavia Hill. And which of the ideas that drove her do you see as most relevant to historians and to all of us, really, today?
I think I've rather fallen in love with Octavia Hill during this. I think what is most is that she has what we would now call a holistic, such an extraordinary holistic version of human existence. And she understands, I think, at an extraordinary level what poverty does to people, how poverty shuts down so many aspects of human faculty. And the engagement with the outside world, with beauty, with music, as well as community, that these are the things that enable us all to get through life. And that it's that total idea of housing is not only housing. That's what I really admire about her. She's thought of as the great pioneer of a certain kind of housing. She's really about enabling the development of a whole human personality. And there's an enormous amount of what she writes. Lots of the stuff, of course, you tear your hair out. Why it would be quite wrong to allow old age pensions. And free school meals would be a disaster, because she wants people to be autonomous and independent. But even those views are part of a very full and generous understanding of what human potential is.
Suzannah, what did you pick up about Octavia Hill's life and work that particularly struck you? I mean, you know, she was very much unique.
Well, I suppose it comes back to the theme I've already mentioned, which is about participation and involvement of community. And also what Neil's just touched on there, autonomy. So I think that means that we've got to allow different places to do different things and have that sense of autonomy, which must be quite scary for Hilary as Director General of the National Trust to hear. But I think, you know, that there's a sense in which there's got to be that variety. And there's got to be that sense of trust. I mean, we know that Octavia Hill wrote a letter every year telling them people what she'd done wrong, so maybe she wasn't completely about autonomy, but that seems to me the heart of it all, really, participation, community and autonomy.
And surprising that, or was it surprising that a woman was at the heart of all of this?
Not at all. I mean, full of good ideas, a woman, really? Yes, it seems to me not surprising at all.
Sathnam, you've said that you think that she would probably struggle today because she was woke.
Yeah, I also liked what she said about, you know, she didn't want to burden the future generations with, dead formulas. I think what she's touching upon there, she understood that history is flexible. History is argument. But at the same time, there are such things as facts, which is you were referring to earlier. And also, there's such things as consensus amongst the experts. It's very unfashionable to talk about experts and to listen to experts nowadays. But I got the feeling that she would have recognised that.
Would she have had a podcast today, do you think, to rival your own?
Well, to rival everybody else in the whole world. Everyone's got a podcast, haven't they? She would certainly have a podcast, yeah. I'm like Neil. I've fallen in love with her through Neil's brilliant oratory, and I am so struck by that terrible expression that she was on the right side of history. All the reasons we just heard, but also in the importance of beauty. I find my mental health, my wellness, my mood, my creativity improves so much when I'm near the historic, our built environments. But also obviously our green spaces. And for her to identify that in the midst of the Victorian slums, that people needed food, shelter, of course, sustenance, heat. But on top of that, because they are human, they need beauty, they need access to art, literature. It was such an empowering, in a world where the proletariat's all too often written off, and is still written off in so many parts of our society, to say that these people are as deserving of beauty and mental stimulation as any product of Harrow or Eton, I think is so revolutionary. And we haven't really talked about it much tonight, but the green, the trees, the green space, the feel of the grass between your toes, she was onto that, and it turns out she was right, because that's one of the great catastrophes of the 21st century.
I mean, she, as we said, she was very democratic. Everyone was invited, everyone was involved. Is it fair, this is going to be quite controversial, I'll ask it anyway, history, whether it's books or podcasts or even National Trust properties, for some people, not all, they all seem to have quite an upmarket feel still. I know that you said that you felt that the demographic was changing and that it was more inclusive, but I don't think that everyone feels that way. How do we change that? How do we challenge that, Neil?
It's very hard. I mean, I was talking particularly about museums, and particularly the municipal museums across the country, where the demographic is encouraging in those terms. There's no doubt. I mean, high culture is perceived as the prerogative, by many people, as the prerogative of the well-off. I think the only way you can change it is by doing exactly what everybody has been doing, just more and more of it. And I think we can take comfort from the fact that in the last 100 years, that's moved a long way. compared with other countries. And I think one just has to keep doing more of it, more of the same.
Dan?
Yeah, and I think we are in danger of overlooking the extraordinary work that's been done. I mean, the Tank Museum in Dorset is a national collection where most of the visitors are, with a huge proportion of C2s. There are museums all over the country, and also the National Trust it's as well as the big posh houses, we're not thinking enough about the spaces like the wonderful railway bridge. You're not telling me that bridge is only frequented by a bunch of history graduates. So I think we are right to be aware of it. We're right to be on it and trying to do better. But when I go on when you go to I was at a historical reenactment of the Battle of Hastings the other day. And there were people, apparently, drawn from the people I was talking to were drawn from every part of society. More to do, but I think we do it brilliantly in this country.
Okay. Now, we're coming to the end of the discussion. We've got a few more things just to talk about, but I wonder whether anyone else has any questions. This is your opportunity now. Do stick your hand up in the air. If you have a question, there's a gentleman over there. The microphone's just coming to you now. And if you can stand up and say who you are.
My name is Guy Trehane. I'm a National Trust member. I'm glad you mentioned the demographic word. I probably betray my years by saying this: as I grow old, my attention span narrows. Well, I think I'm in good company, because as it narrows, I think I'm catching up on some of the younger generation, the bite-sized generation who are subjected to quick-fire television, quick-fire music, quick-fire cinema. But the great exception is radio. And could I ask the panel of broadcasters just for their views on how the National Trust can try and get through to the young, the message and the depth of the narrative of our very special places?
Well, first of all, I would say hopefully with this broadcast and this programme, which is going on the radio, but it's a very, very good point. Dan?
Well, but my experience in National Trust houses, they're absolutely rammed with young people. I mean, they are just full of young, I mean, again, this battlefield reenactment, again, not owned by the National Trust, but thousands of kids running around with plastic swords whacking each other. It's good to see. So I think we sometimes can exaggerate the crisis of history among young people. It is, I think, one of the, if not the most popular GCSE subject for 16-year-olds, optional subject, I think, history, one of the most popular degree subjects in the country. Young people are into history. Horrible Histories TV show is a global phenomenon, born here in Britain, which millions of kids are obsessed by. We are really good, and history adjacent. Kids love playing computer games with historical inspiration. I think they love watching TV shows set in historical past, real or imagined. So I think we kind of worry about, I think the kids are all right, actually. Obviously, we'd all love them to do history to postgraduate level, but I think, again, in terms of other countries I've been to, my mum's Canadian, British kids are engaged with history, free museums, the extraordinary heritage we have, walking through our cities. We do pretty well. We can always do better, I agree. I think we lose them, oddly, in their kind of 20s and 30s when they, frankly, understandably, discover other amusements. And then we get people back again when they get sensible enough to realise that history is vitally important and history is everything. It's the reason that everything around them is the way that it is. But it requires a few years, I think, to get there, between finding Henry VIII fascinating and absurd to realising that history kind of underpins your daily existence. You got to let the kids have 15 years off, and I think we needn't get too worried about. That's my sense.
Is anyone worried at all?
I think museums have got a bigger problem than the National Trust. I think young people feel the way they feel about museums is the way we felt about zoos. It's like, why do they even exist? Isn't it cruel to have the animals in cages? And I feel they're very... If you watch a film like Black Panther, it really reflects the way that young people feel about museums. I don't think National Trust has such a big problem.
Okay. Right, we're coming to the end of the discussion. Just to all of you, really, given all that we've discussed and what Neil has said, just a final question, really, which is what kind of National Trust would you like to see in future, Neil? In fact, if you could
I'd just like to see more
us.
of the same.
Which is?
Well, exactly what I was talking about this evening, this steady widening of the narratives to embrace a larger and ever larger public, and giving an ever larger public the sense, the understanding that this is part of their story and they are part of it. And it's that turning a shared history into a shared memory and a shared experience, isn't it? I mean, that's what builds a community, and more of that, I think, is what I would hope to see.
Well, amen to that. Now, that is all that we have time for this evening here on Times Radio. I'd like to thank the National Trust for putting on this amazing event, the first of its kind, the first Octavia Hill lecture here at the Royal Society. Thank you to the staff at the Royal Society for all their help, and to our brilliant panel, to Dan Snow from the History Hit podcast, historian, author, broadcaster and Professor Emerita at Roehampton University, Suzannah Lipscomb, and Sathnam Sanghera, columnist from The Times and the author of Empireland, How Modern Britain is Shaped by Its Imperial Past. And finally, we must thank, and I'm sure you will too, the art historian and museum director Neil MacGregor for giving us his wonderful first Octavia Hill lecture for the National Trust here on Times Radio. So thank you to all of you for listening and coming here tonight, and good night.